know, chaos is something I'm tired of talking about. I'm tired of reading about it. But you know what? We're not the first group of followers that have had to deal with chaos. As a matter of fact, would you believe that the word naked has something to do with chaos? I'm going to talk about that here in just a second.
Welcome to Cross Brand Sunday morning service. We are so glad you guys are here. Once again, we hope that you will like and share this video and help us reach people for Jesus. I do want to introduce, I did this Wednesday night, but our awesome sound guy doesn't care who he hangs out with because he's playing with us. So this is Ian Power, and he's hanging out with us this morning playing bass for us. So thank you very much. It don't have a job, don't pay your bills, won't buy you a home in Beverly Hills. Won't fix your life in 5 easy steps. Ain't the law of the land or the government, but it's all you looked my way. You looked my way. I called your name. You looked my way. You looked my way. I called your name. You looked my way. You looked my way. I called your name. What could separate? What could separate? Life will rise, death will die. Your love is mine. Your love is mine. Stained was white. You paid the price. Your love is mine. Your love is mine. Ooh, ooh. Your love is mine. Your love is mine. Ooh, ooh. Your love is mine. Your love is mine. This last song we're gonna do is entitled "Let There Be Light," and that's a very powerful statement when it comes from the one who created light. These are some crazy times we're living in. Man, seems like every day, seems like things get worse. But I just want to encourage you this morning that the same God that created light, that spoke it into existence, is still in control today. So it's called "Let There Be Light."
When you speak, darkness has to bow. Confusion has its final hour. When you speak, mountains rise and fall. It tears down every wall around me. When you speak, you breathe upon the dust. You come alive and run. When you speak, you silence every fear. You feel your
What's naked got to do with chaos? I'll tell you why. Because in the beginning, if you'll read over in Genesis, and I understand this may not be some of your fit your worldview, right? But as followers of Jesus, most of us are going to go back and see our beginnings. And so looking at life from a creationist point of view, we understand that when God created man, woman, that they were running around naked until that one choice. And you read it sometime. But it says their eyes were open and they realized they were naked. Now I know if you were in a big church, they would say naked. But we're Cross Brand. It's just naked. Nekked, naked. So what was the ultimate source of the chaos? It goes way beyond naked. It goes back even farther. A choice that they made, S-I-N. That's what caused the whole problem. MacArthur tells us out of the 66 books in the Bible, 1,189 chapters, right? There's only 2 books and 4 chapters that don't mention sin or the sinner. But yet here we are struggling to figure out what is the source of the chaos. And so what I want to do today is just kind of give you a lesson in sin. Sin 101, if you want to know. Because at the end of the day, I think if we were to reacquaint ourselves, or maybe for the first time, if you haven't ever thought about it, what is the true root of what we are experiencing in America right now? And we'll find it relates to one word. So 4 statements, 4 questions. Here we go. Number 1, Sin 101, what is sin? Well, look, I can give you all the big theological definitions of sin, but here's one of the most basic. It is when we intentionally and even unintentionally do not follow the will of our Father. There's a lot of words that are associated with this, right? Here's selfishness, pride. I bet you know those if you've been in church for a while. But here's a new one that I read just yesterday that I love. It's autonomy. That means that most of us, we want to be autonomous. We don't want to conform to anybody's standards, especially our Creator's, which is exactly where that first sin came from. It's so big a deal that we've dumbed it down a little, right? I always kid around with folks at Cross Brand that we have in America, we look at sin and felony and misdemeanor categories, but just think about it. Some folks even have trouble using the word. We have pastors and teachers all over America, some major TV guys that don't use the word sin. And for whatever reason, that's their deal. But how in the world can we get away from chaos if we don't look to the source? And here's the thing. A lot of folks would say, well, I'm not really a sinner. I'm a mistake maker. Well, you've heard me talk about this before. I love Andy Stanley's explanation of this. But there is a big difference between saying I made a mistake morally and I chose to sin. I hear folks say that they made a mistake. You know, this was a mistake. And so the difference between a mistake and a moral choice, of course, is that the mistake was accidental. A mistake is what you do when you take the wrong road on vacation. A mistake is what you do on a math test. A mistake is not getting drunk. A mistake is not sleeping with someone else's spouse. Those are sins. And so even though we dumb them down or we may use other words, the truth is that we sin. Sin is at the very bottom of the source of chaos. A lot of folks view sin, especially if you're in the Bible Belt, that, well, I'm a pretty good person because I follow, the Big Ten. And you understand the Big Ten, the 10 Commandments, were just 10 of the high points of 600 and some other rules. I always ask myself the ultimate test of whether or not I've been a sinner or a mistaker this week is found in John 13:34. We talked about this last week. So now I'm giving you a new commandment, love each other just as I've loved you. You should love one another. Paul comes in Galatians 6:2 and even explains it farther. He said, you want to know when Jesus gave that new commandment to new covenant followers, New Testament guys like you and I? Paul said, share each other's burdens, and then you know if you're obeying that law that Christ gave you. So here's the question, even in my own life this week, am I a mistaker or am I a sinner? Whose burden have I helped carry this week? And if I hadn't, read for yourself. Second question, why do we sin? Well, I was in a brown Ford pickup that's still sitting behind our tractor shed there in Wood County. Micah was a little bitty boy. He just barely learned to talk. I had chased the neighbor's bull until I lost it. I went to the dark side. And so I bumped the neighbor's bull with my pickup. Immediately, the hood on my pickup looked like a teepee. Micah looked over at me and he says, Dad, why do we do that? I just looked back at him and said, because I'm an idiot, son. Well, let me tell you, sometimes, by the way, I'm not going to always be that candid and honest with my kids about why I do certain stuff. But we got to ask ourselves, why do I intentionally do wrong? Why does this happen? And when does it happen? And I'm going to tell you, there are certain, the best way I can say this is it comes with the birth package. It just comes with the birth package. You know, when we had Lily, our first grandchild, there's no mistaking who her mama was. You could look in her eyes, and even as a baby, you look at her nose and you go, hey, that's Allie's baby. And so we just expected the next one to look that way. And sure enough, he comes out and he's got his mama's eyes and his mama's nose, and he's crazy like somebody's kid. My point is, there's certain things that you expect in a birth. Unfortunately, because of a choice that Adam and Eve made, we have inherited generation after generation after generation sin. Sinners going to sin. We're going to misbehave. It's not something that we want to talk about. And listen, I these verses are tough. But you read in Romans 5, Paul says, hey, when Adam sinned, sin entered the world. Adam's sin brought death, so death spread to everyone, for everyone's sin. There's a lot more to be said about that passage. There's a lot more to be talked about. But again, this is just the short course in Sin 101. Sin comes with the birth. We're born sinners. We're sinners by nature, sinners by choice. I've said that a million times. And as much as that offends every grandparent that looks into the eyes of their beautiful grandchildren, listen, ain't nobody going to have to teach them how to misbehave. It comes natural. So what is sin? Why do we sin? And number 3, there is a solution to this sin and this chaos. I won't take you back to Genesis, but I will say this. There is, at the risk of sounding way too simple, we got to understand that there's a cure for sin. Now, if you grew up in church, you understand and you'll remember some of these passages. Matthew said at a very special birth, it was a birth announcement, and she will have a son, and you're to name him Jesus, for he will educate his people. No. He will make people happy. No. He will save them from their, here it is, sins. And Paul would even go farther and he would say, God showed us his grace by sending Christ to die while we were yet, here it is again, sinners. Now, I encourage you to do this. A lot of folks that are listening to me would say, well, I don't know that much about the Bible. I don't understand some of the stuff. Well, the good news is that understanding has zero to do with the problem that we all have. Start with the empty tomb. We don't start with understanding. We don't start trying to figure out and balance where dinosaurs came from in creation. I'm telling you today, Jesus came to save. Jesus is ultimately the solution to our sin problem. The only catch is, in addition to recognizing the source of changes, we've got to change our minds about where we're at. Two men went up to pray one day. You've heard the story probably. And one was real arrogant about his sin. He didn't even acknowledge it. And the other man would hit himself in the chest. There's a great story in Luke chapter 18. And he wouldn't even go in the church house, right? Stood off at a distance and wouldn't lift his eyes to heaven. But what he said was he prayed, and he literally hit himself in the chest and said, God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner. Sinner by nature, sinner by choice. He was tired of the life he was living. Listen, sin is heavy. It's hard to carry. It's hard to tote. Now, could I say a couple of things? You may or may not want to hear this. We all got the sickness. We're sinners by nature, sinners by choice. You may want to call it a mistake. In the end, this is who we are. And in a minute, I'm going to say what this has to do with the chaos in America right now. But look, there's two situations in which you need to come to a point where you deal with that sin. One is for the first time. We call that being saved. We call that being born again. That's what Jesus, the phrases he used. It's at one time, on purpose, on your own choice to invite Jesus to forgive you, believing that he was who he said he was about that empty tomb. And then there's a second time. You ready for this? For some of us, I gave my life to the Lord when I was 19, but since then, I feel like Paul. And he says, I really don't understand myself, for what I want to do is do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. You ever feel like that? Paul felt like that. There are times when all of us are weighted down by dumb choices, bad attitudes, sin. Even believers, even followers of Jesus, or sometimes we drift. And so I say it again to you today, Jesus is still the solution. So what does this have to do with the chaos in America right now? Number one, oh man, I think we need to be aware of the real source of the chaos. When we are aware that everything that is happening in America right now, that sin, man's basic nature, is the chaos, I think the conversation will change. Number two, if we know the cause of the chaos, the source, sin, shouldn't we be talking more about the solution? If we understand that sin and man's basic nature and humans' basic needs, we're all connected and that we're all messy. We're all sinners. But we're all sinners that Jesus gave his life for. If we understand that, I think the conversation can change. And could I ask you this? Is it just me, or have I seen an uncomfortable number of people, or an uncomfortable amount of people who claim to follow Jesus who are not talking about the solution? Now, I'm talking about on social media. I'm talking about in the protest. I'm talking about at the coffee shop. If we know the problem and we know the cure for the problem, why have our conversations not changed? I've seen a lot of posts on social media that have to do with anything except the solution. Jesus didn't come to change politics. Jesus did not come to educate out of who we were. We're sinners by nature, sinners by choice. And Jesus had to die, chose to die. So why are we not talking about him, the solution? In your family, how many conversations this week will parents have with their children, with their distant teenagers who really would just love to have a discussion and not a lecture? How many people have presented the solution in their circles, whether it's at work or with their buddies? And then finally, what about on social media? I know not everybody does social media. If you're listening to us, you probably do. But listen, I'm curious. If, like me, you understand the source of the problem, the rioting, the looting, the violence, the horrible things that some folks in authority have done to harm people. If we understand that that's sin, why aren't we talking about it? And if we're not, why aren't we letting other people talk about it? Taylor's on the other side of the camera, and I haven't asked her this, but if I'm not mistaken, only 47 people shared last week's sermon on social media. I need some folks. If you believe in the solution, I need some folks to start sharing our content. Be as Paul said, I am not ashamed of the good news about Christ. Oftentimes we get caught up in whatever is the cultural current. But I'm asking you today to start having conversations that would tell people the solution. Listen, as I close, I want to thank you for your time, but really, Jesus is the solution to the chaos, right? We want the chaos in America to end. I get it. Education and better policies, they're a start, but only a change of heart is the solution to the chaos. So if you're sitting there today and maybe you know Jesus and you've drifted, or maybe you've never, ever started at the empty tomb, you said, I believe that, but I also believe that I'm messy. I'm a sinner, just like centuries and centuries of Scripture has said. And today, if you want a change, listen, just have a conversation with Jesus. Tell him what you want change, and ask him to change your life and forgive you. God bless you.